Sit with me for a moment. Let the noise of your day fall away and allow your thoughts to soften. This is not a lecture, not even advice, but a gentle journey into the hidden parts of human nature, where love, misunderstanding, and quiet truths about men and women live. Every man, whether knowingly or not, does something with the woman he loves. And when we notice it, we see how it shapes both connection and distance, warmth and silence. Every man, in his own way, creates a mirror. For his woman, it is not a mirror of glass, but one made from his eyes, his presence, and his ways of responding to her being. When she speaks, he reflects back not only her words, but also his interpretation of them, shaping how she feels about herself in that moment. When she laughs, he becomes the surface that receives her joy, making it grow or shrink, depending on how he responds. This mirror is subtle, often unnoticed, yet it carries the power to either affirm her sense of self or make her doubt it. Psychology teaches us that identity is not built alone. We are formed in dialogue, in relation, in the gaze of another, and for a woman, especially within intimacy, the gaze of her man can become one of the most influential forces in shaping how she feels about her worth, her beauty, her strength. In this way, every man becomes something like an artist, painting a version of his woman through his attention. Sometimes his strokes are delicate, showing her softness. Other times, they are bold, portraying her as radiant and unstoppable. Yet he may also, without intending to, paint shadows where she does not wish to see them. If he looks at her with frustration, she may question herself. If he turns his eyes away, she may feel invisible. This dynamic is not about blame, but about the deep truth that we are mirrors to each other. And in love, the mirror of a partner becomes one of the most powerful. There are moments when she looks into his eyes and sees a version of herself that feels even more real than what she sees in her own reflection in the glass. His admiration can make her feel luminous in ways she has never felt before. His respect can remind her of strengths she forgot she had. But there are also moments when his silence leaves her suspended, uncertain of who she is in his world. It is a dance of perception, a weaving of self and other, where both psychology and philosophy remind us that identity is never a fixed thing. It is fluid, shaped by relationships, by recognition, by the delicate interplay of two souls. Yet the mirror that a man holds is not always steady. It shifts with his own moods, his struggles, his weariness. If he is burdened by his own inner conflicts, the mirror may become clouded, and what she sees in him may not reflect her true self, but his own heaviness projected outward. This is where philosophy offers comfort. It tells us that perception is not truth, that being seen in a certain way is not the total measure of who we are. Still, within the intimacy of daily life, the way one is perceived can feel as real as reality itself. Consider the small details of ordinary life, where this mirror shows itself most clearly. A man sitting at the table, glancing up as his woman moves about the room. His eyes can speak volumes without uttering a sound. If they soften with warmth, she feels cherished. If they grow distant, she feels alone. In the way he responds to her ideas, whether with attentiveness or distraction, she gathers quiet signals about her importance in his inner world. It is never just about words spoken directly. It is about the unspoken reflections that shape the atmosphere between them. History, too, has noticed this. In ancient writings, from the Greeks to the Eastern sages, there are reminders that a lover's gaze can lift or diminish the beloved. Poets have long described how being seen by another is like being given new life. The gaze of a man does not simply observe, it constructs. And so, knowingly or not, every man becomes a kind of philosopher, presenting to his woman an interpretation of who she is. She then walks through the world, carrying not only her own self-image, but also the echo of his perception within her. When we reflect on this quietly, we begin to see how much of love is about perception rather than possession. Love is not something one can earn. It is something one can see, shape, and respond to. The philosopher Martin Buber spoke of the I-thou relationship, where one being encounters another in their fullness, not as an object, but as a presence. In many ways, when a man truly sees his woman, not as a role or a function, but as a living being with depth, he elevates her sense of self. But when he reduces her to an object of duty, of convenience, or even just of admiration without depth, the mirror loses clarity. This is why so many moments between men and women carry more meaning than they appear to. A glance, a word, a pause, all are reflections. All are pieces of a mirror. To live together is to live inside this ongoing exchange of reflections, where each moment is shaping the story of how one is seen and how one is known. When this awareness grows, one can begin to understand not only their partner, but also themselves more deeply. For in the mirror of another's eyes, we discover truths that we cannot find alone. But here lies the hidden variable. Men do not always reveal this reflection through words. Most of the time, it comes in gestures, in the way they move through the quiet moments of daily life. A woman may long for his affirmations, for the sweetness of language, but instead she finds herself learning to read his pauses, his touch, the way he places a hand on her shoulder without saying anything at all. Human beings have always relied on such unspoken signals. Long before complex speech, communication rested in glances, gestures, and rhythms of presence. Modern psychology calls it non-verbal attunement, but in simpler terms, it is the art of understanding someone without needing them to explain themselves. Think of a couple walking together down a street. He may not declare his love aloud, but he adjusts his steps to match hers, slowing when she slows, waiting when she lingers. This subtle alignment communicates as much as words, perhaps more. Or consider the way he sits across the table, his eyes lifting briefly to meet hers when she speaks. That glance, that attentive silence, tells her she is being heard, even without interruption or commentary. These are the mirrors that matter, the quiet messages carried not by voice, but by presence. Philosophy has long reminded us that companionship is not measured in grand gestures, but in the ordinary weaving together of two lives. In many cultures, meals were seen not merely as nourishment, but as sacred rituals of togetherness, sharing bread, passing water, sitting side by side. These were ways of saying, "You belong with me," without ever speaking the words. When men and women share these small customs, they communicate devotion far more lasting than declarations that fade after being spoken. The ancient world understood something we often forget. Gestures carry memory, and memory carries love. Yet these gestures are not always intentional. A man may not realize how much his woman notices. She feels his mood when he enters the room. Whether his steps are heavy or light, she senses the distance if his arms remain crossed instead of open. She gathers meaning from the way he places his phone aside to look at her, or the way he leaves it between them like a silent wall. Such small acts tell stories, whether he intends them or not, to her. These details are a language of belonging, and because she is attuned, She often hears what he is saying even when he believes he has said nothing. In the rhythm of daily life, this unspoken language becomes a foundation. When gestures are tender, they weave comfort and security. When gestures grow careless, they create confusion, sometimes even pain. Still, these patterns are not fixed. They can be reshaped, refined, made conscious. A man who becomes aware of his silent communication begins to realize that love is not only spoken in words, but in the way he carries himself beside her. Consider again the wisdom of traditions. In some Eastern teachings, silence was not seen as absence, but as presence in its purest form. To share silence with someone was considered one of the highest forms of intimacy. Walking quietly, sitting together in stillness, watching the same horizon without needing to explain. It was in these quiet moments that bonds grew strong. Today, psychology affirms the same idea, calling it synchronization or non-verbal bonding. When two people are comfortable enough to exist together without forcing words, it is a sign of deep trust. And yet, gestures can also carry tension. The man's silence may not always be serenity. It can sometimes be withdrawal. A glance away may not be carelessness, but an attempt to manage his own burden for the woman. These mixed signals can be difficult to interpret. She may wonder if the silence is a form of rejection or simply a space he needs to breathe. These uncertainties belong to the hidden variables of love, the unseen layers of the human psyche that make relationships both fragile and profound. Philosophy suggests that to live with another is to live with mystery. One can never fully translate every gesture, every silence, every look. And yet, this very mystery is what keeps love alive. If everything were explained, if every silence were filled, intimacy would lose its depth. The gestures of men, whether soft or distant, invite women not just to interpret, but to feel, to experience presence beyond words. Daily life offers countless examples of this hidden communication. The way he reaches out his hand when crossing a busy road, the way he places his jacket around her shoulders on a cold evening, the way he turns off the light when she is too tired to rise. None of these are declarations, yet they shape her world. Through such details, a man tells his woman who she is to him, cherished, protected, noticed. These gestures may appear small, but they are often remembered longer than speeches. The psyche does not archive words as carefully as it does actions. Thus, men, often unknowingly, create a language of love through their behavior. It is a language learned slowly, in the spaces between conversation, in the pauses that stretch, and the motions that repeat. Women learn to listen to this language, to sense its patterns, to feel its meaning in their bodies rather than their minds. This is why love often feels less like a dialogue and more like a rhythm. Two beings moving, adjusting, aligning, sometimes clashing, but always communicating in ways beyond speech. Still, every man also tests the resilience of his woman, though most of the time he does not set out to do this deliberately. It is not usually a planned trial, not an intentional challenge, but something that emerges naturally from his own inner struggles, his own shifting moods, his own need to retreat into himself. There are moments when he withdraws, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly, and in that space she feels an echo of doubt. The silence that follows his retreat can sound louder than any spoken word, carrying with it questions that touch the most sensitive parts of her being. Am I still chosen? Am I still important to him? Does he still see me as I long to be seen? These questions rise quietly, yet their weight is undeniable, because to a woman, closeness is often woven from steady presence, and absence feels like a shadow falling across her world. This pattern has existed for centuries, noted in stories, poems, and cultural practices around the globe. Ancient myths often depicted men setting out on journeys, leaving their beloved behind, sometimes for months or years. These stories were not just about travel, but also about the emotional distance that inevitably enters relationships when one partner must wrestle with his own battles. Modern psychology gives language to this same phenomenon, calling it detachment or avoidance, yet beneath the labels lies the same timeless truth. Men, in their inner conflict, sometimes create spaces that women are left to interpret, and these spaces, these pauses, can feel like trials of endurance. What makes this more complex is that such withdrawal is not always a sign of diminished love. A man may step back, not because he wants to leave, but because he needs space to manage the burdens he carries silently. Many men have been shaped by cultures that teach them to keep their struggles hidden, to solve problems alone, to retreat inward rather than speak outward. When he withdraws, he is not always closing the door on her. He is sometimes trying to find clarity within himself, yet from her perspective, the absence can feel like rejection, the quiet like a verdict, and so what is for him, an inward search, can feel for her like an outward wound. Philosophy helps us to see this in another light. It reminds us that absence has its own form of presence, just as night is not the end of the day, but another aspect of its rhythm. A pause in closeness is not the end of love, but part of its cycle. When a man creates distance, he may be unknowingly inviting his woman to see love in its broader form, not only in constant nearness, but also in trust that survives silence. Still, this is difficult to hold in the heart when emotions rise. The mind understands that silence may not mean rejection, but the heart aches with longing all the same. Consider the small ways this test plays out in daily life. Perhaps he comes home weary and sits in silence, offering no explanation. She wonders if she has done something wrong, if the silence is aimed at her. Perhaps he grows less expressive for a few days, lost in thought, and she feels the chill of uncertainty. Or perhaps he avoids discussing something that troubles him, and she imagines distance where there may only be hesitation. In all these moments, the test is not in his intention, but in her ability to hold steady, to keep faith in the bond, even when visible signs of it seem faint. Psychology teaches us that silence is communication, that even what is withheld carries meaning. A lack of words, a lack of touch, can signal stress, fear, or insecurity, but it can also simply reflect a different style of coping, one that does not easily translate into shared dialogue. This is why so many women describe feeling tested in love, not because their partners set out to challenge them, but because the gaps in expression become places where they must decide whether to wait with patience or to react with fear. The test is not of loyalty alone, but of understanding, of being able to see beneath the surface and recognize that the absence may not be about them at all. Across cultures, wisdom traditions have tried to prepare women for this rhythm. Old sayings often remind us that men retreat like the tide, but tides return. The ebb is followed by flow. The test, then, is not to resist the retreat, but to understand its place in the larger pattern of human closeness. Philosophy would say that love is not a straight line, but a spiral, drawing close, pulling apart, circling back again. Each time the spiral widens, it offers a chance for patience, for trust, for deeper knowing, and yet for the woman inside it, the experience can feel raw and tender. She may feel as though her worth is being measured, as though the man is silently asking whether she can endure his silence. whether she can hold faith when reassurance is not immediate. This is why it feels like a test, because it touches the deepest human need, the need to be chosen again and again, not only in moments of joy, but in moments of difficulty. To be resilient in these moments is to accept the paradox that love is sometimes loud and visible, but other times quiet, hidden, asking for patience in ways that words cannot. And so we return gently to the quiet beginning, to the truth that every man does this to his woman. He mirrors her with his perception. He speaks in gestures more than in words. He withdraws and returns, weaving a rhythm that is as old as human connection itself. It is not a flaw, nor is it always a choice. It is part of the way intimacy unfolds between two beings who are endlessly shaping one another through their presence. When we notice these patterns, when we learn to sit with them instead of resisting them, a new kind of softness begins to form, a calm acceptance that even silence and distance can be part of love's language. Life itself is filled with such rhythms. Rivers bend around stones. The seasons shift from warmth to cold and back again. The sun disappears each evening, only to rise again. These movements teach us that continuity does not mean sameness, that closeness does not always mean constant nearness. A man in his relationship often follows these same natural cycles, sometimes shining with warmth, sometimes hidden in quiet, sometimes steady, sometimes withdrawn. And in each phase, he is not abandoning love, but expressing it in a different form. For his woman to understand this rhythm is to find peace even when the pattern feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable. Philosophy reminds us that perception often colors reality more than fact itself. To a woman, the absence of words may feel like emptiness, yet to the man it may be a space of gathering strength. To her, a delayed response may seem like hesitation, but for him, it is sometimes reflection. When these differences are seen not as opposites, but as complementary ways of being, the space between them becomes gentler. Psychology calls this the widening of perspective, the ability to hold two truths at once, that he may withdraw and yet still love, that he may be silent and yet still care, that his distance is not always a verdict, but often a form of self-preservation. In daily life, these truths are lived out in the smallest details. She notices when his eyes soften while watching her, and in that moment, she feels seen in a way no words could match. She notices when he places a hand on her back as they move through a crowd, a silent gesture of protection that speaks volumes. She also notices when he grows quiet, his attention turned inward, and though it unsettles her, over time she begins to see that these pauses are part of the larger dance. Love is not only what is given outwardly, but also what is carried inwardly, and sometimes the inward weight requires space before it can be shared. The hidden variables of the psyche are what make this dynamic so intricate. Every human carries unspoken histories, unseen fears, unexpressed longings. Man may withdraw, not from his woman, but from the echoes of his past, from expectations placed on him long before he met her. He may mirror not only her, but also the way he has learned to see himself. And in this, the relationship becomes a space, not only of companionship, but of healing, where both partners learn to recognize that the patterns between them are shaped by deeper forces than either one fully controls. To see this is to release blame and enter into compassion. Ancient thinkers spoke of love as both a bond and a trial, something that lifted the soul but also revealed its weaknesses. They believed that intimacy was not meant to be simple, but meant to refine. A woman tested by her man's silence is, in a way, being invited into this refinement, not because he wishes to hurt her, but because love inevitably exposes the places where patience and trust are required. And for the man too, the cycle becomes a mirror, showing him that his silences are not empty, but carry weight, that his gestures shape her world in ways he may never fully understand. To live with this awareness is to move beyond the surface of relationships. It is to understand that what feels like distance can be an invitation to deeper trust, that what feels like silence can be an opportunity to listen differently, that what feels like a test can be a path toward resilience. The obstacles that appear in love are not barriers to happiness, but pathways to growth. Just as the stones in a river do not stop its flow, but guide its direction. A man mirrors, a man withdraws, a man returns, and through these movements, a woman learns not only who he is, but also who she is within the bond. In the end, philosophy and psychology together offer the same gentle lesson. Nothing in love is wasted, not the words spoken, not the silences endured, not even the uncertainties that stir the heart. Each moment belongs to the greater pattern. Each gesture holds meaning. Each pause carries within it the possibility of renewal. To recognize this is to ease the weight of hardship, to see obstacles not as endings, but as passages, and to allow love to remain steady, even in its quietest forms.